Last episode, I got a lot of nice feedback from you guys. You really enjoyed Craig Chalquist and that conversation, which we will return to at some point. The discussion of how we are all influenced by the places that we live in sort of subconscious and not always immediately discernible ways. Very rich subject. Today, I would like to zoom out a little bit once again and actually, for I guess the first time in this podcast, discuss the current conditions from the astrological perspective. So we've done sort of big picture with the discussion of the yugas and a little bit of Ayurveda and some of the collective cultural influences. We've discussed parapsychology, so sort of on the ground and the subject of landscape and place and those influences. So now I'd like to get to what is actually probably what I'm most actively involved with, since I do most of what I do right now is astrological consultations and teaching. So I'd like to look at the sky and the current conditions coming through the planets, which if you're not familiar with what planetary transits are, they are what is happening in the sky right now and how that is influencing events on the ground. And these transits, first of all, we're looking at the sidereal zodiac. The Vedic zodiac is a sidereal zodiac, which means with the stars. And it is the zodiac that is accurate to what is happening right now. So it's different from the tropical zodiac, which is the Western zodiac, which is about 24 degrees different than the Vedic zodiac. And so if you look up at the sky right now and where the planets are, if you have one of those little phone apps, it is going to be accurate to what you would see on then the Vedic chart, the horoscope, that you can pull up on the different software programs. And that's not the case with the Western zodiac. You're going to see the planets in different places with the Western or tropical zodiac, which was accurate at around 290 AD when that zodiac was fixed. But because of the precession of the equinoxes, things have changed, and it's no longer accurately reflecting where things are in the sky right now, which is part of, I think, what makes Vedic astrology so powerful for predictive purposes, is that it's showing what's happening right now, so you can make decisions based on that. So these transits in the sky are going to be they're going to be giving collective influences, and I'll talk some about that. But it's important to remember that the transits are going to be interacting with your personal planetary karma as well, meaning your horoscope. So I will give you a visual of a little bit of what that looks like, but this is why not everyone is experiencing transits in exactly the same way. So it's always good to remember that broad statements that are made about planetary transits are going to need to be filtered through your personal chart. So let's see, I can share my screen. So this is the Panchang, which is the Vedic calendar for my location in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And it's showing you a bunch of information, astrological information about what is happening right now, which actually at some point I'd love to get into. We can get into what some of this means and how to work with it, actually, because there's a lot of simple remedial things that can be done to improve your life, even if you don't know that much about your chart. But for today, what I just want to get across is how the transits interact with personal charts, and then hopefully we'll get into a little bit about transits as well, the transits themselves. But let's take the example of, let's just do a simple athlete. If we can find him, we can't find him. No. Here we go. We're not going into any details here, so it doesn't really matter who it is. But this is a basic South Indian horoscope for Barack Obama. So this is the AS is showing the ascendant at the moment of his birth. This actually, the South Indian chart, it's a little bit harder to see, but this is the horizon line. So this is what was ascending on the horizon at the moment of his birth, which is actually a very powerful combination of Saturn and Jupiter. It's a very heavy hitting combination. And then this was on the western horizon, Sun and Mercury in Cancer. And then these planets are all going to be below ground. This was what was happening underground, and then these planets are above ground. So, and it's a little bit easier to see in the other chart styles. And this is the horizon line here in the North Indian chart, but I tend to use a South Indian chart. So this is the red planets are what was happening the moment he was born. All of this other information is more detail about different areas of life. These are divisional charts that show different areas of life. Even these you can modify to see different things. The Panchang itself giving more information, and then all these different timing periods, the dasha system. We're not going into any of this, I just kind of want to show you how much there is. And the dashas themselves, you can see all sorts of different methods for timing in an individual chart. So that is a lot of information that for right now is not important to know. But the cool thing that we can look at right now is how these planets and their placements at his moment of birth, those are sort of written in stone for him. That's going to show his inbuilt karma and his tendency to respond to life in different areas of life in different ways, depending on what's where. So he's going to have that going on all the time, and different aspects of that will be activated more or less at different times depending on these different planetary periods that he's in, and even some aspects of a chart are activated based on different activities that he's choosing. For example, if he buys a new house, then the 4th house is going to be activated. If he gets a new job, the 10th house is getting activated. So there's different ways in which this different karma is coming in, but this overall is what he's coming in with. And then if we want to see what's happening now, this is what's happening now in the sky, the blue planets. So these are the transits, and I know many of you may not be familiar with the how to read this chart at all. So just know that each of these boxes are representing different signs. So these are the 12 signs of the zodiac, and this happens to be Capricorn, so he's a Capricorn rising, and that means that Pisces is his 3rd house, and you can see there's a lot going on in Pisces right now. If we go back even a little bit, there's a lot more going on in Pisces towards the end of March. We had that eclipse. There were at one point, 6 planets in Pisces, so that was a really big transit around those 2 eclipses that we had, kind of, and then right after the solar eclipse, Saturn entered Pisces. So that was very dramatic, and the point I'd like to get across is that impact is going to be different for everyone depending on what area of life Pisces is representing for you. So for him, it was the 3rd house. You can see from Capricorn, which is the ascendant, rising at his moment of birth. If we count to Pisces, we go 1, 2, 3, and each house has its own indications and areas of life that fall into that place in the chart. And so for him, that area, that everything that falls into the domain of the third house, which has a lot to do with actions and activity and siblings and kind of like being busy, or sports. Sometimes it's the hands and the arms, so things that you go out and do in the world and pick up and all sorts of things like that. For him personally, that's what was activated. If we had a Virgo ascendant, this is a sign Virgo, then Pisces would be in the 7th house for that person. So that would mean that there's a lot of relationship things going on, or a lot going on for whoever the person is in a relationship with, the partner themselves potentially, or just kind of confusion in the domain of relationship, because there would have been so many conflicting opinions represented by the planets there. So despite the fact that we were at that moment all undergoing this Piscean activation and potentially confusion, the brunt of how that's impacting the person is going to be felt in these different areas of life. And then that's also further modified by, if, for example, the person actually has planets in that sign, because then the transit planets are going to be interacting with the natal planets, and that has different effects as well. So, and you can just see how these are going to be moving. I'm just following the sun's transit right now, but you can do that with any of the planets. Following the sun's transit gives us a month-to-month view, so you can see how everything's going to be shifting and then interacting with his natal planets. And so he's going to have a Rahu Ketu partial return, what we call a partial return happening here. And you can see the red planets are not moving, but the blue planets are. So this is basically how like the weather system of the transits comes and interacts with what I kind of think of as like the more stable like geology or ecology of the natal chart. So the transits they have more movement in them, but the natal karma is just there. So those are, it's kind of an interesting way to see time for an individual. So let's go ahead and look at now. And location actually not really important right now. So we're doing a broad overview. So we need to rewind a little bit, talking about transits, to, some of you may remember, 2020, important year. Astrologically also an important year. So, actually this is going to be easier. So if we go to 2020, this was the year that a once in every 200 year transit happened, and that is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Happens every 20 years. Let's see if we go to 2000. You see again Saturn-Jupiter conjoined in Aries there. But there's once in every 200 years the element of the sign that conjunction is happening in changes. So it was the year 2020 that the conjunction happened again for the first time in 200 years in an Earth sign. And I actually wrote a blog about this on my website, maggiehitman.com, which I will try to remember to link, called The Era of Earth. But it's significant that the last time that conjunction happened in an Earth sign, it was around the time of the Industrial Revolution. And so there were major large-scale changes that were happening around that time. And these transits do tend to coincide with big, impactful, like cultural and sometimes the rise and fall of civilizations, those sorts of bigger scale changes happening. Jupiter and Saturn together, they both are very heavy, slow-moving planets. They carry quite a bit of karma, So when they come together, Saturn is the slowest moving planet, and Jupiter is also fairly slow, moving one sign per year. Saturn moves one sign every 2.5 years. So they're kind of like, they just can generate a lot of energy when they come together. And so wherever they join, that place is going to have a lot of meaning during that time. And especially when they're changing elements, it's kind of like a fully different chapter beginning. And the thing about Capricorn, where they conjoined in 2020, is it's an important sign for the age we discussed previously called Kali Yuga that we're in. It's kind of the Kali Yuga sign. And so it's sort of like activating that energy, the energy we talked about with a lot of like moral degradation and compromise in values and general decay of society and civilization. So, it's a difficult door that was opened, is kind of how I think of it during that time period. And so you saw this massive, large-scale shutdown of the world, which is very consistent with that energy. And we can't say that just healed up after 2020. That actually was sort of the beginning of this new cycle of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in Earth signs. So that was not a fleeting, obviously, passing phenomenon. You can feel how even like the texture of reality is sort of different since that time period, with a lot more divisiveness and charge in the social sphere, and sort of this breaking energy has entered the picture. So part of that is that this conjunction set a new tone for the next 200 years. Part of it is also related to other factors, including the nodal transits during that time were very strong because of there was, I think, a 3-year period of the nodes being exalted. And the nodes are also very extreme, potentially divisive planets. So there was like this tearing effect happening on multiple levels during that time. So, and one more thing about Capricorn itself is that it's a movable Earth sign. So it's a very powerful sign because the Earth element itself is very obviously substantial and heavy and can create like really substantial change. And then that movable aspect makes kind of like a bulldozing energy. So it's not a light, airy change happening. It's this like almost earthquake sort of energy that comes in during that time. So that kind of sets the stage for then any transits that are happening after that time is inside this larger theater, basically, of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn. So that's our context. Okay. And there have been obviously impactful transits since that time. There's a lot to talk about. Actually, I don't want to spend a huge amount of time in the time between then and now, because there's actually so much happening right now that needs to be discussed that I don't want to use a lot of time on other kind of smaller transits that happened since then. So let's go ahead and go to this spring so we can start to get a little caught up here. And if we go to the end of March, you see all those conjunctions in Pisces. And that was, so the lunar eclipse was on March 13th, and the solar eclipse was on the 28th, and this may vary depending on your location. The main thing to say about the eclipses is that there have been a handful of eclipses over the last couple of years in Virgo Pisces axis, and so for anyone who knows their chart and knows that they have significant planetary placements or ascendant or moon in those signs, that will have been a pretty dramatic or like time of a lot of life changes, because that's what the eclipses tend to uproot and change things. And truly, for better or worse, eclipses can bring in a lot of opportunities and positive changes, but it's generally a destabilizing sort of energy. So though that eclipse cycle that happened in March was the last for a while in the Pisces Virgo axis. So that that's going to be nice for people who have been kind of wondering if their lives are ever going to settle down. So other people will be challenged based on where the eclipses are happening next, but at least those signs are getting a little bit of a break. So I won't go too much actually into that eclipse itself. The main thing is that there were 6 planets in Pisces during that time, and that's a large weight of the zodiac being in one sign, and it generally shows big changes, potential disturbance, a lot of, in the sign of Pisces, it's a lot about the collective mind, the collective unconscious, and what's happening like under the surface. The 12th house, it has a lot to do with what's not completely in our awareness. What's like, it's basically kind of like behind you. And it can also be what precedes you, like it can sometimes show ancestral karma and things like that. And so if we see, so this is Pisces, and if we see, there's a way to read the chart as like the collective chart, and it's generally read from Aries, and this is the sign Aries here. So that would be the majority of the zodiac in the 12th house and Pisces, okay? And that's like things that are percolating right underneath the surface. It's a pretty big energy drain as well. It's kind of like disruptive to sleep and rest, and potentially stirring the pot in terms of like psychological distress, things like anxiety and general disturbance in the realm of mind and thinking, as well as dream life and anything in the more subconscious realm. So, and this combination in particular, this Rahu Saturn, which these are 2 air planets that get together about every 11 and a half years. And when they do get together, it's called storm yoga. And so they kind of whip up this windiness that can be difficult to manage. In the sign of Pisces, this is very much related to the whole world, the technological world, the world of AI, and Pisces has that dreamy quality of kind of like invention and ideas and things which will impact the world at large. And so that I think that the AI kind of developments and revolution are connected to this Rahu Saturn, and I don't think that we will see the real results of that immediately, because Pisces is Pisces in the 12th house that we're reading it from here in this collective chart it's a concealed, kind of amorphous, slippery spot in the zodiac that's very much like not necessarily visible. So these are all things that are happening kind of like underground that, again, I don't think we're going to see their results of immediately. So if you have felt kind of like uneasy in a way that you can't quite understand or identify or even necessarily work with, I think all of this Pisces action has a lot to do with that. And a good way to work with it is actually through dreams and through even, meditation for sure, if you can get your mind to focus, because that's another thing about this transit, is it can create this like muddy mind where it's actually can feel very difficult to be clear at all. So that presents a little bit of a challenge, but things like dream work or even kind of things that work with that subconscious or partially conscious state, like hypnosis as well, can be interesting to explore during this time. but it's not the easiest energy to work with because it is so murky and sort of unclear. So that's something important to remember. If you know what house Pisces is in your personal chart, that will have been a house that may have felt fairly overwhelming over the course really of the spring, potentially, as the planets gathered there, and then the end of March, definitely when Saturn actually entered Pisces and the eclipse happened, that kind of like upped the ante and brought in even more intensity during that time. So some of that will start to pass as the planets move on here. Like if we come to now, we still have 4 planets there. There's a whole nother subject with the Venus and Mercury conjunction here, and Venus is exalted, Mercury is debilitated. So, and for a while they were both retrograde, and so that was bringing in all those reversals and kind of a confusing energy. But these will also be circulating out of Pisces, along with, if we even go until May 18th, Rahu will also leave Pisces, leaving just Saturn. So the real kind of energy to get on board with right now, or in this month for sure, is going to be just Saturn and Pisces. He'll be there for the next 2.5 years. And so that's an adjustment, because until the end of March, Saturn was in Aquarius, which is his own sign. And when such a slow-moving planet moves, there's usually some adjustment that's happening in your life in that area as well. So you kind of like knowingly or unknowingly have gotten accustomed to Saturn being in Aquarius, kind of like limiting and bringing discipline and sometimes some amount of lack or suffering or burden to whatever area of the chart that's representing for you, whatever area of life. For the collective, it has actually kind of depressed and limited and brought the burden to the area of, it's kind of like the community, friendships, social area of the chart. And so there's been this kind of like depressing effect for the last couple of years there, which I think is also pretty palpable. But that will lift, and Rahu will replace Saturn, and there will be actually just like that part of the chart, which is the other people and the group energy, will have this sort of rebellious flavor to it. Rahu is a very rebellious planet in Aquarius, so if you have felt depressed in your social life and friendships, or burdened in the group sphere, which would be easy to understand why, that should be shifting, and it remains to be seen whether that's a positive shift. I expect some kind of like social rebellion and revolutions happening during this time with such a strong Rahu. He's in his own sign in Aquarius, in the place of like community and groups, and Aquarius is a sign associated with revolution. So hopefully, I expect to go into more detail about that later. I did write a Substack post just today going into a little bit of this nodal transit. But I was wanting to talk a little bit more about Saturn in Pisces, which is a potentially very powerful transit, but it will be an adjustment since so there's multiple ways that this transit can come through, and again, it will depend on your individual chart. But one way that Saturn in Pisces can be read is in terms of its spiritual benefit. Pisces is a highly spiritual sign, not necessarily religious, but it is very connected to something larger, to a larger source or the field or any form of divinity, or just a sense that like this, everything has meaning. It's a very faithful sign. There's a lot of faith in higher powers, or that there's more than just the material world. And Saturn here can bring enough discipline to what can be kind of like a disorganization in Pisces to make this spiritual life or the spiritual quest very productive, and actually like create something from that. So that's one possible benefit of this transit. In general, it is a nice time to bring form to big ideas and things that feel fairly ephemeral or like too big to put into words, which is another, it's kind of like the energy of Pisces, a very creative sign. It's the ocean itself, which is like where all life comes from. But it's difficult to distill that energy into something that you can hold or something that you can understand, something kind of tangible. But Saturn in Pisces can do that. Saturn is the sort of like handyman mechanic of the zodiac and has a lot of practical skills and discipline. He moves slow enough that even the big, sloshy, disorganized elements of Pisces can actually, you can kind of like create something from them. So this next 2.5 years actually is a good time. And again, this will depend on personal placements in your chart, but it can be a really good time to give form to any ideas that you've been percolating there in the background. And through discipline and sustained effort, those are sort of Saturn's requirements, is that you like learn to kind of like focus and be disciplined and limit yourself so that some order can be created from that chaos in Pisces. One potential challenge to that is that Rahu, so all the planets have their own aspects that they cast to other signs or other houses from wherever they're located. Rahu does have a second house aspect. It's actually it's a 12th house aspect in reverse, but functionally speaking, it aspects the second house from itself. And so Rahu will be aspecting Saturn. So there's still an element of that windstorm energy coming into Pisces, even though Rahu will have moved the middle of this month from Pisces. And that can still create this kind of like low-level anxiety, disruption, confusing, murky energy subconsciously and in all the areas associated with Pisces, which by the way include the oceans themselves. It's a sign of coastal places in the ocean, so not the best time for oceanic environments as well. So that windstorm effect will need to be managed. So if you have been kind of like delaying reining in your mind, or like dealing with your personal anxiety or sleep issues, potentially like ability to rest is seen from Pisces as well, I wouldn't just wait for that to pass. I would really address that, because potentially for the next 1.5 years, some level of that could still be present. And if you want to take advantage of the potential benefits of Saturn in Pisces transit, you need to have the energy and focus to do so. So anything that's going to support your rest and also your mind and concentration, like in Ayurveda, there's various herbs that work directly with or against Vata usually to support that part of life that's associated with cognition, and there are other methods, of course, of doing that, different supplements and things that can help. This would be a good time to do so. I would highly encourage that. Of course, that's all based on individual constitution and whatnot, but in general, you want to really take the health of your mind as seriously as the health of your body. Always, but especially during this time, because part of that 6 planets in Pisces lineup and then the Saturn Rahu conjunction there My personal biggest concern is for collective mental health and attention and the ways we're using our minds. I think that the kind of like biggest disturbance is probably in that area. So I'm encouraging everyone to support themselves on that front in whatever way they can, whether it's through assessing the way their rest and their diet and maybe supplements for the mind, or meditation practices. Really bare bones meditation practices are really good for Saturn and Pisces, like Buddhist style, really simple breath meditation, following the breath, just like bare awareness. Getting into the imagination and visualization and all that, I think that could probably confuse the situation a little bit more. So, and again, that will depend on your personal chart and all that, but in a basic way, I would say go Buddhist. Can't go wrong with Buddhism, I don't think, or Buddhist meditation. So that's a very rough lay of the land, but that is the context I want to give for today, just so we can get started on transits and what's current in those conditions, so that you can understand that maybe some of the ways you're being pushed and pulled are actually based on the karma coming through the planets into the collective sphere and interacting with your own personal planetary karma. And then this information can be integrated with the things that we've already talked about as well, in terms of being in Kali Yuga and having this already collective weight that was predicted a long time ago, and we're seeing kind of with the astrology, we're seeing like in what specific ways that's coming through, I think. And then the way that comes through in the collective will also be interacting with the various aspects of the places that we live and what karma those places have, which in tarot psychology I don't necessarily use the word specific types of reactivity and flavors in different places that has that sort of pull to it. So, like I discussed a little bit about the tarot psychology of Utah in a previous episode, and so that's a place where things tend to get stuck with the Great Basin, inside the Great Basin, and some of the cultural features and weather systems of that place, like the more difficult, challenging times. That might be the way that energy goes, is towards stuckness and stagnancy and a little bit of suffocation sort of energy there with the inversion, whereas other places things are difficult, might go in a different direction, like we talked a little bit about California too, and the kind of edginess there. So if the intensity is ramping up in the collective, they might get more kind of like revolutionary and rebellious, and even a little bit more strange, like the fertility there, kind of fomenting new ideas and all that, like that's the direction that they might go in. I'm thinking of places in the east and like the Himalayan region where there's already a highly developed sense of spirituality. So if the pressure is amplifying in the world, getting amplified by various transits or time periods like the Kali Yuga we discussed, they might get pushed even more in the spiritual direction and towards ascension. So the energies at play that we're all experiencing together will kind of filter through and be modified by your personal karma, by the place that you're in, by all these like individual and collective aspects that create the texture of any given moment and time period. So these are some things to think about, and I'm actually not sure where we're going next week or next episode. So, but stay tuned for that. And I love getting your feedback. So if you feel like you want to share anything, please feel free to. And I will see you next time.